Good evening and welcome again to Vegas October 1 Sounds. There's been a couple disparaging remarks in the comment sections on the fact that I'm new to the game of publishing YouTube videos. And quite honestly, I prefer it that way. The whole purpose of publishing now is that I have such a tremendous backlog of information and research that I felt it was time to start releasing what I consider to be basic, reasonable, logical, factual measurements. I am by nature kind of an introvert, as most engineers are. I like to often do things by myself, and when I feel that I have a pretty good understanding of things, I share it sometimes. But in this case, what I can be is a middleman between the real experts in the field, who are electrical engineer types like myself, and a general public who doesn't have the background needed to interpret what these guys are saying. And I think that'll be the real value in these videos. I'm going to be kind of technical along the way, and as an indication of just a few of the things I've got planned at the moment is this list which I put together. And I'm just going to run through the next 30 or so ideas that I've had. There's been some questions about the first 6 shots and what's really there and everything, so I thought I'd do something on that and compare 12 of the videos that I've looked at regarding the first 6 shots. And then I'm going to take one of Mr. Robert C. Mayer's papers and read it to you, and at every technical term that I come along, or every equation, I'm going to explain it. And by doing this, I hope that the listener will become familiar with the terms which I've lived with all my life. And that way, I hope to bring everybody to a level where they can at least read some of these papers for themselves and make a little bit of sense out of it. Doesn't mean we'll always understand what they're writing, because even a 5-term equation can be impossible to understand the full implications of. But anyway, that's the concept. So we'll look at the first 6 shots in a little bit of detail, and that'll be done mostly with Sonic Visualizer. And then I'm going to read one of the introductory papers from this Montana State University electrical engineer who's an expert in the field. And the first paper I'll read is an introduction to the practicalities of doing audio analysis on gunshots. And then I'm going to present a little paper of where did that sound come from, and I'm going to go over in detail what people hear when they hear gunshots and what direction they look, because it's not what you think, and it's complicated from a mathematical point to tell people what really happens. But with a few diagrams, I think I can bring people up to the knowledge of why, when you hear these supersonic cracks, you're looking in a direction different than where the shooter is. The next one would be much like the second video I did on a 3D visualization of the muzzle blast, only in much greater detail. And then we're going to take a geometric model of the shock wave, for both the theory and its application to the phenomena that we hear in Vegas. And then I'm going to cover the cyclic rate of firing and the variance of the rounds as a predictor or classifier of weapon type. Let's see here. 7 will be a quick, short one. Farmers, the channel Farmers, he's done a lot of good stuff over there in terms of being practical. And what he did was take the 223 and fire it inside a building. And it's a real good example when you look at the waveform of what reverberation is. Alright, number 8. I'm going to talk about how in aligning videos directly to each other, that is, if you take volley 1 and out of one video and align it to volley 1 in another video, what that really means, and what that can tell us about the nature of the gunshots that evening. Yeah, I'll take and do a not real time, but I'll do a review of the Corey Langdon video using Sonic Visualizer to show you what some of the content inside that video looks like, because there's a lot of different sounds. There's honking. It's a good environment because generally it's kind of quiet, so the signal to noise ratio is good. You got the taxi, you got her, you've got the gunshots, you've got echoes and reflections and just a whole bunch of good stuff. And it's not overly crowded with all the massive chaos that happened in the venue at the same time. Number 10 will be a review of Volley 7 because it gives a lot of people problems, and probably one of the most quoted sources for proof of multiple shooters, which is just the opposite of what Volley 7 really shows. And then we'll talk about and review the Campos hallway shots. Number 12. I'll go into a little bit of detail about what the muzzle blast records in terms of counting the number of rounds and what it doesn't. Then I'll go into a little bit more detail than an earlier video on cyclic rate of fire. I'll cover the 6 booms. Those were 6, I don't know what they were caused from, maybe boots on the stage being amplified through the speakers, but there's 6 of them. They're very regular, and they can be heard on multiple videos, and I'll show you what they look like, again with spectrograms. Then somewhere along the lines, number 16, I'll take and look at all the volleys, and I'll show you what graphs can be applied to these volleys and how you can understand them from a graphical point of view, individually, collectively, and in groups. And along the same line, another video using the graphs will look at the gaps between volleys and what might possibly have happened, or at least the timing of what might have happened. Number 18, I'll write a little program that models the shockwave and the muzzle blast, and we'll use that to make some determinations about the timing. I'll take all the observations I've made, and we'll talk about what happens if both the shooter and the observer are in fixed locations, and what happens when either one of them moves in terms of the timing of these things. And we'll take a look at the data that I've actually collected and see what it says. Number 22 would be one of my favorite. I think my biggest complaint about a lot of the research that goes on with Vegas is that at the beginning it was fun to say, oh, looky there's that guy in a black ninja suit running across the top of a trailer. But in audio analysis, it's just the opposite. Finding one video with one type of event is not fun, because that's an anomaly. And so for me, I have to have, at least 4 videos to feel that I've confirmed a sound that is common to multiple videos, and therefore it's likely something that needs to be looked at, because every audio records something different, even if it's for the same sound, and you can never be sure. Single events in an audio analysis are difficult to pinpoint and identify the source of and things like that. But if you can get them in multiple cases, then it becomes much more probable that your analysis is more complete. Yeah, that was kind of a rough statement, but anyway. Number 20. I'll just go through and show you some of the impact sounds, how they look on a waveform, how they look on a spectrogram, where they are, and in what videos have a lot of them, and what they mean. And then I'll take the talking guns hypothesis, and I'll show you most of the observations and measurements I have that actually contradict that theory. And then we'll talk a little bit in 22. We'll talk a little bit more about why multiple sources in audio analysis aid the convergence of a hypothesis, and single source or anomaly promotes divergence. Then we'll just do a simple overview of Volley 10 and talk a little bit about it, not in great detail, but enough to get you familiar with what's unique about Volley 10. And then I'll give you a complete timeline in graphical and numerical form for all the gunshots that I've analyzed, which will be all of them to some extent. On number 25, I'm thinking about doing a video on the several types of devices available that simulate gunfire, and when you apply analysis that I did in video 1 to them, what you come up with, and why in most of the cases it's fairly trivial to identify them as being simulation devices. Although I did come across one device which was actually very good at simulating gunfire. In fact, it was so good, at least the muzzle blasts, that you can identify it by its regularity. It puts a machine gun to shame in terms of its regularity. Number 26, I'll talk about comparing the loudness of sounds from one recording to the another, and why it's difficult, the technical reasons behind it, and why it's often very misleading. And of course, one of the most controversial subjects for me, which is those 8-308 shots, 6 in the middle and 2 at the end. And I'll do that in a couple videos. And of course, nothing would be complete here about audio analysis if you didn't talk about the effects of the dynamic compression codecs and data algorithms that are used in these video formats and audio formats. And let's see. Oh yeah, number 30 will be an interesting one. If we have we have speakers on the stage and placed around various places in the venue, and sounds come out of them, and those sounds can be are recorded on multiple videos. Using those sounds and knowing a little bit about the placement of the recording, you can align those videos with that sound, and then you can get some absolute measurements in time for the gunshot sounds which come from a different source than the speaker, because they'll align differently in the video than all the sounds which come out of the speaker. 31 will go over what a two-dimensional graph of a three-dimensional lag field looks like. It's a pretty straightforward one, but the math behind it is not rocket science, but unless you're used to creating video games and programming the algorithms to do rotation, translation, and adjustment, then you're probably not real familiar with what it takes to do that. I'll do an analysis on the Campos Shuck recordings as they are, and then I'll do an analysis of the after midnight 4-round bursts on multiple body cams. And then I'll show you the nature and difficulty of taking a cop cam, or a body cam as you want, if you will, and isolating the sounds that come from the radio and the sounds which are in the foreground. It can be done. I do it, but it's not pretty. Number 35 will just be an out and outright direct assault on the helicopter theory. Number 36 will be a technical presentation uh, around the N-wave theory, or the form of waves from the form of the shock wave, basically, for one portion of it. And then I'll do a little bit qualitative discussion about what we can tell from the sounds regarding the gun, the weapon type, the ammo, and possibly even the shooter. And beyond 42, I don't know yet, but I'm going to have to cover all of the volleys in detail. So that gives me, I think, enough material for several months, really. Anyway, so for those who want to know what I'm going to be doing, here's an idea. Good evening, and we'll see you in the next video.